Okay, welcome back. In this video we will have a look at command line arguments in Python, or to be more precise, how to parse command line arguments in Python scripts. So let's have a look at command lines arguments in general. So what are command line arguments? Basically, if you are starting something from the command line, a program from the command line, like here the ls program, which we have used already in this course several times, then you are just writing the name of the program. But sometimes that's not enough because you want to pass additional information in order to change the behavior of this program. One possibility for the ls command would be just to pass the directory which it should list the content of. For example, I am passing here /tmp as a directory. Or I could pass also some so-called optional arguments, which you can recognize on the dashes here. And they are starting with a double bash or a single bash. For example, here, in order to make sure that all the files are listed as also the hidden files, not just the normal ones, or the -l option to make sure that additional to the file name, also additional informations are shown when I'm listing a directory. So those are the so-called arguments. And as you can see here, we have two different types of arguments. One is the so-called positional arguments. This would be here the /tmp in this example. So they are usually at the end of the command line. They can be multiple, one or more. The order might also matter. So for example, I could here specify further directories, and of course ls would list them exactly in the order who I specified here, and how many I can specify, or whether I can specify any, or whether the number is fixed or arbitrary. This depends, of course, on the program and how the functionality of this program should be influenced by the arguments. The other type of arguments which we see here is the so-called optional arguments, and as I already said, you can just recognize them by the minus option, so they are starting with dash, and usually optional means that they don't have to be there. They can be there in order to modify the behavior of the program, but usually the program also runs if you don't specify any of them. Good. Now we will just make up in a very, very simple Python script. So basically type please this Python script into your working environment, into your development environment. And I will just say a few words here for that. Type it please in, and then we will test it, and then we will have a later step-by-step look on why this is working. So we will use the so-called argparse module, the argument parse module, which is part of the Python distribution, standard Python distribution. And in order to make a so-called argument parser, it's super simple. We are from the argparse module, we are just creating an argument parser instance, object instance. Here we are just passing a keyword argument description, some description, which I was just defining in here. Then we are adding an argument. This time it will be an optional argument, because you see this is the argument -d. Or it will have also a long form with double dashes minus directory. We are providing some default value for this argument in case the user doesn't specify it. And we are also adding some help message, which is just defined here above. The same with the next argument. We will call it number, so it doesn't start with a dash. That means it's a positional argument. We will even give the type, so it should be an integer, and the metaphor is not that important at the moment. And also here we are specifying a help message, right? And then when we just set up the parser, so basically set up which kind of options or arguments our program accepts, then we are calling the parse args method of the parser. That means look at the command line arguments which actually had been passed, and based on the information which we just provided above, parse those arguments. And then we come back a so-called namespace object, an args object, which has fields or attributes for all the options which we have set up. For example, there is args has an attribute called directory, which would contain the directory or the option which has been specified with the minus directory, or the value which has been specified with the minus directory or -d options on the command line. Or it has also an attribute number, which would basically contain the value which has been specified on the command line as positional argument. So type that in, and if you are working under Linux or Mac OS, maybe you should make your script executable. That you can do with a change mod +x and the name of your Python file. Under Windows in the git bash, it should work out of the box. And if you now basically start this test.py program, standalone program, and you just pass the option -h, which we actually didn't even specify in the example before, you nevertheless get some very useful information, because you get a very nicely formatted output from which contains the name of the program, which contains the options which can be specified, right? So we have -h for the help, the -d option, which also expects a directory as an additional parameter, and here the number, the position argument num. Then we have here the description, which we just defined. Then we have here a list of the positional arguments, including the help message, which we were just specifying. And we have also a list of the optional arguments, of course, including the help message, which we have defined. And also the -h or -help option is specified. Additionally, we don't have to specify it explicitly. So that's already very, very useful, because Python basically makes sure that you get a very nice help message if you are querying your program with the -h option or the -help option. Now let's try to test our example with various different argument combinations. Let's, for example, just pass the test.py just the value 2. That means I am passing a position argument 2 as a string, but it should be interpreted as an integer. And you will see for the directory argument, which we did not specify, we will just get the default value which we set up before. So if you look it up here, for the default value, we were setting at the dot. So basically this had not been specified in this command line, and therefore it just obtained the default value. For the position argument, we were specifying the 2, and then we obtained in the args object for the positional object the value 2. Now what happens if I'm specifying an optional argument -d, and it also requires an additional value. So the -d/tmp had been specified, and suddenly for the directory, the value for the directory is filled up with a /tmp as a string, and so on and so on. Or you can also use, of course, the long version of the option -- directory, and again you see that here accordingly the directory field is set up with /tmp. Now let's try to feed our example with some kind of wrong arguments. For example, here I'm just calling the script. You can test it yourself without any arguments, which is not valid, because this script expects exactly one positional argument. This is mandatory, and immediately you get a nicely formatted help message which tells you also the reasons. So basically here that the following arguments num was required and was not specified. So basically argparse also makes sure that your program can be only started with a combination of arguments which are allowed, which have been explicitly specified. Or for example, let's try to pass here as a position argument something which is not, it doesn't look like an integer, like I am specifying here 3.2. However, we had set up that this argument type should be an integer, and immediately we get an error message that this num which we specified is not an integer value. So it's very, very helpful, and make sure that your program can only be used with the arguments which it is supposed to obtain. Or you could, for example, try to pass an option which had not even been defined, like let's say -a. -a option was never defined, we didn't define it for our script, and immediately you get the error message that this is an unrecognized argument. So basically this helps you a lot to make your program, your command line tool, very, very robust on the command line interface itself, and only accept the arguments which it really is supposed to deal with. Now let's have a look at step by step how we just built up this argument parser. So let's go through that once more. We were just creating a parser. This is an argument parser object instance, and one of the most used option which you would pass here is just a keyword argument description, and you would pass it some kind of description which can be then seen in the help message as we have seen before. Then you are populating your parser by using the add argument method. So you are always adding one argument at a time. You can pass a short form of an argument and a long form. It does not have to be a long. It can have a long form. It is not necessary. It can have a short form. It is not necessary. But it will be, of course, an optional argument if it starts with a dash or with a double dash. Here I decided to use both a long and a short form, so the user can use both of them. Then we are specifying some default value in case the user didn't specify this option, and the obligatory help message in order to make sure that if the help is required, then some meaningful information are written onto the screen. Then we were adding the next argument, so we are populating our parser further, again calling add argument, and now we are passing an argument which does not starts with dash. That means it is an oppositional argument. We are setting it the type, so that means the type is an integer, so Python will make sure that the argument which we pass on the command line can be safely converted to an integer. And we are setting a sort of metavar, and this metavar is just even the name of the argument, how it appears on the help page. If you remember, we had num as the name of the argument. On the help page, it only basically influences the help page. If you do not specify it, then argparse would use the name number instead, but I found it too long, and therefore I thought, okay, use the metavar in the help meta variable on the help page with num, and then suddenly at the end, of course, the help message again. And that's basically it. We have set up the parser. Now we are asking Python to parse the command line arguments here. So basically those which had been passed on the command line. You can use it here. If you do not want to parse those which were passed when the program was started, then you can here specify also a list of arguments and those would be passed. But the default behavior is parse the ones which had been passed by the user when calling the script. And we are getting back stored in the variable args, a so-called namespace object. And this namespace object is super simple. It contains basically entries for all the options which we had specified. So for example, this args will have here an attribute directory, which contains the value of the directory, either the default value if the -d or --" directory option was not specified, or if those options had been specified, then the value which was given and specified for them. And again, here the .number field would specify, here in our case, contain the value for the number argument, which was the positional argument. And basically, that's it. With that, you have a very, very simple minimalistic example to start and write command line argument parsers in Python. Always use the argparse module. It's a very, very convenient one and making your program very, very robust. And of course, the argparse can do much more what I have shown here. So make sure to consult the argparse tutorial, which is a very nice tutorial introducing you into also more elaborated feature of the argparse module and the argparse parser. And also not just a tutorial, but you can also visit the documentation, the official documentation of the argparse module itself, and it will show you all the further options which you can do with this very nice and robust argument parser in Python.